My parents took my $112,000 savings after I refused to pay for my sister's education, so I made them pay a worthy price for what they did to me. When I was 18, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I had just graduated from high school, and while most of my friends were rushing off to college or trade school, I felt stuck. My grades weren't great, so my options were limited. I thought I'd take a year off to think, work, and figure things out, but my parents thought that was just another sign that I was a failure in their eyes. All their hopes and dreams were pinned on my younger sister, Ashley. She had graduated from high school the same year as me, we're that close in age, and she was their golden child, straight-A student, honors programs, scholarships, the works. My parents didn't just think she was smarter than me, they knew it, and they didn't hesitate to remind me at every chance they got. So, when Ash decided she wanted to go to an expensive private university far beyond what her scholarships could cover, my parents came to me with a proposition, or rather a demand. "We need you to help pay Ashley's tuition," my dad said one night at dinner. At first I thought he was joking. What? Why me? I don't even have that kind of money. "You have $122,000 in your savings account," my mother said matter-of-factly. "That's enough to get you through at least the first year. You're not going to college now anyway, so it's just sitting there." I froze. This money wasn't just sitting there. I'd worked for it, all through high school, doing odd jobs, working weekends at a diner, mowing lawns, whatever I could find. I saved every penny because I didn't want to be stuck with no options when I finally figured out what I wanted to do. "This is my money," I said, trying to stay calm. "I saved it for me, not for Ashley. She's already got scholarships, I'm not giving it to her." My dad stared at me like I had just slapped him. "Are you kidding me? You're not even doing anything with your life right now. Ashley's going to make something of herself, and you're going to sit here and let her struggle?" I felt my stomach churn. "It's not my responsibility to pay for her college. She's your daughter, not mine." That's when things escalated. My mom jumped in, saying how selfish I was, how I'd always been the problem child, how they'd done everything for me, and now it was my turn to give back to the family. Ashley just sat there, arms folded, with that smug little grin on her face, like she knew they'd get their way in the end. I refused again, and the conversation ended with my dad storming out of the room and my mom calling me ungrateful. I thought that was the end of it. I thought they'd be mad for a while and then move on. I was wrong. 2 days later, I went to check my bank account, and the money was gone. All $122,000, just gone. I panicked and confronted my parents. "You stole my money," I yelled. My dad didn't even blink. "We didn't steal it. We were using it for the family. You weren't going to use it anyway. You had no right. That was my money. It's our house, our rules," he said coldly. "If you don't like them, you can leave." Then my mother chimed in, echoing his words. "We don't need you anymore. You've been a disappointment from the beginning. You had no intelligence, and now you don't even have any money. So get out." It felt like a punch in the gut. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My parents, my own parents, had basically disowned me because of money. I laughed, though, not because it was funny, but because the whole situation was so absurd that it didn't feel real. "Fine," I said. "I'm out of here." I packed a bag that night. My dad tossed me $30 on the way out and said it was for the bus. That was it. I was 18, broke, and homeless in one weekend. I didn't know where to go, so I called my grandmother. She lived 3 hours away and had always been the only person in my family who treated me like I mattered. When I told her what had happened, she was furious. "Stay where you are," she said. "I'll send someone to get you." Her neighbor drove me to her house the next day, and when I got there, she hugged me like I had just returned from war. I told her everything, and for the first time since this nightmare started, I felt like I had someone on my side. Then she said something I'll never forget: "They need to be put in their place." I didn't know what she meant at the time, but I would soon find out. Staying at my grandmother's house was like entering another world. She lived in a small, cozy house in a quiet neighborhood, and for the first time in days I felt like I could breathe. She didn't ask me to explain any more than I already had. She just let me rest, eat, and process. But the next morning she was all business. At breakfast, she sat me down and asked, "Are you going to do something about this, or are you going to let them get away with it?" I didn't know how to answer. What can I do? They're my parents. They had access to my account somehow. So what can I say? She shook her head. "It doesn't matter that they're your parents. What they did was stealing, plain and simple. You worked for that money. It's yours. They stole it, and they have to face the consequences." I just stared at her. The idea of standing up to my parents like that felt impossible. But she kept talking. "I've dealt with people like them before," she said, her voice calm but firm. Your grandfather, God rest his soul, was just like your father. Always thought the world owed him something. Always took what he wanted without a second thought. I spent years cleaning up his messes, but I learned how to deal with people like that. And believe me, they only learn when they're forced to face the consequences. I still wasn't sure. But how? How do I even start? She leaned back in her chair and smiled. I know a lawyer, a good one, an old friend. We'll talk to him and see what he says. It felt surreal, but a part of me was beginning to believe her. Maybe I didn't have to take this lying down. Maybe there was something I could do. Later that day, she called her lawyer friend, a man named Mr. Harrow. He was in his 60 seconds, with a gruff voice and a no-nonsense attitude. We met in his office the next morning, and after I explained everything, he sat back in his chair and let out a low whistle. You just took the money? No explanation? No agreement? Nothing? Nothing, I said. They told me I didn't deserve it, and that it was for Ashley's college. He shook his head. It doesn't matter why they did it. What matters is that they had no legal right to take it. The account was in your name, right? Yes. Then they committed theft. It's as simple as that. Hearing him say it so clearly made something click in my head. For the first time, I realized that what they were doing wasn't just wrong, it was illegal. Mr. Harrow laid out the plan. First, we'd file a police report to document the theft. Then, we'd send a formal demand letter to my parents, giving them a chance to return the money voluntarily. If they refused, we'd file a civil lawsuit to recover the money, plus damages. It all sounded overwhelming, but my grandmother was by my side the whole time. She promised me she'd support me no matter what. The first step was to file a police report. That was nerve-wracking. Explaining to a police officer that my own parents had stolen from me felt humiliating. But the officer was professional and understanding. He took the report and said they'd look into it. A few days later, Mr. Harrow mailed the demand letter. He showed me a copy before he mailed it, and it was brutal. It laid out everything they'd done, how it violated the law, and what would happen if they didn't return the money. When my parents got the letter, they didn't take it well. My dad called me, angry. You think you can threaten me with a lawyer? He barked. I'm your father. I don't care what some piece of paper says. You're not getting that money back. I didn't even argue. I just hung up and told Mr. Harrow what had happened. Good, he said. That makes our case even stronger. A week later, we filed suit. That's when things really started to heat up. My parents weren't just angry, they were panicked. They started calling my grandmother, begging her to drop it, saying I was ruining the family. But my grandmother wouldn't budge. You brought this on yourselves, she told them. If you'd done the right thing, none of this would be happening. Ashley even got involved, texting me to tell me I was being selfish and ruining her future. I didn't respond. The whole thing was exhausting, but for the first time I felt like I was standing up for myself. I didn't know how it would all end, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me anymore. After the lawsuit was filed, my parents went from angry to panicked. First, they tried to call me and tell me to drop it. My dad even said, "You're tearing this family apart," as if I was the villain here. I didn't bother to argue. Then they turned to my grandmother. My dad showed up at her house one afternoon while I was out, yelling about how I was being manipulated and how she needed to stop interfering. She told him to leave or she would call the police. That was the end of it. Her lawyer tried to argue that the money was family property because I'd earned it while living at home, but that didn't hold up. Mr. Harrow handled everything, and frankly, it was pathetic to watch my parents try to justify what they'd done. Ashley, of course, took their side. She kept sending me these long texts about how selfish I was and how I was ruining her future. I didn't respond. There was no point. As things progressed, it became obvious that they were struggling. They started selling things, furniture, appliances, whatever they could, probably to pay their lawyer. It was strange to see the tables turning. They had stolen from me because they thought I didn't matter, but now they were the ones desperate for money. Me? My grandmother remained rock solid through it all. She kept reminding me that I had every right to fight for what was mine. For the first time, I actually believed her. The trial was coming up, and I knew things would get worse before they got better, but I was ready. For once, I wasn't going to back down. The trial felt like the culmination of a nightmare I never wanted to live through. Sitting in that courtroom, I couldn't shake how surreal it was. My parents, my own parents, were on the other side, their lawyer struggling to justify what they'd done. My father looked angry, his face flushed as if he could barely hold himself together. My mother sat stiffly, not meeting my eyes. And Ashley? She wasn't even there. I wasn't surprised. Mr. Hargrove laid everything out clearly and methodically, breaking it down in a way that even I could follow. He had all the evidence, bank records showing the unauthorized withdrawal, proof that the account was solely in my name, and even statements from my former employer confirming that I had earned the money myself. Her lawyer's defense, on the other hand, was weak. They argued that the money was family property because I'd earned it while living at home. Then they pivoted and claimed that I'd verbally agreed to let them use the money for Ashley's tuition. It was a lie, plain and simple, and Mr. Hargrove shredded it. The judge didn't seem to be impressed with their arguments, and I could see my dad getting more and more tense as the case went on. When the verdict came down, I could almost feel the weight off my shoulders. My father was found guilty of theft. The judge sentenced him to 2 years of home confinement and ordered him to pay back the $122,000, along with additional fines and court costs. My mother, though not directly responsible for the theft, was given a formal warning for her role in the situation. Hearing the verdict was a strange mix of emotions. On the one hand, I felt relief. I'd won. Justice had been done. But on the other hand, it was my family who sat there, defeated and humiliated. I hadn't just burned bridges with them. I had practically blown them up. As I left the courtroom, I passed my father in the hallway. He was staring at me, his face full of resentment. He didn't say anything, but his expression said it all. I was no longer his son. My mother avoided eye contact completely, not a word of apology. When we got back to my grandmother's house, she hugged me tightly. "You did the right thing," she told me. "No matter how hard it feels, remember that." I nodded, but her words didn't sink in right away. I kept replaying the trial in my mind, wondering how it had come to this. They were my parents. I didn't want to destroy them, but they had left me no choice. The fallout didn't stop there. Ashley, who had been so vocal about how I was ruining the family, went completely silent. No more texts, no phone calls, nothing. Before, she would have jumped at any chance to remind me that she was the smart one, or that I'd never be able to keep up. Now, not a word. I learned from mutual acquaintances that my parents were struggling financially after the trial. They had to sell more of their belongings to pay the fines and legal fees, and my dad was stuck at home under house arrest. Part of me felt sorry for them, but another part couldn't forget how easily they had betrayed me. Winning the case wasn't just about getting my money back, it was about standing up for myself after years of being treated like I didn't matter. For the first time, I felt like I'd taken control of my life. But it came at a price. My relationship with my family was irreparably damaged. They had made their choice, and I had made mine. Now, I had to figure out what to do next. At least this time, I knew I'd do it on my own terms. The dust was beginning to settle after the trial. My dad's house arrest meant he couldn't leave the house, and my mom was stuck shelling out from everything. I hadn't heard from her or Ashley since that day in court, and honestly, I wasn't expecting to. It felt like my family was officially over. I focused on rebuilding. My grandmother was incredible. She let me stay with her while I figured out my next steps, and she never once made me feel like a burden. I got a part-time job at a hardware store in town to start saving again. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me something to do, and it felt good to be earning my own way again. One night, after a long shift, I came home to find my grandmother waiting for me in the kitchen with a small envelope in her hand. She looked hesitant. "This came for you today," she said, sliding it across the table. I picked it up and froze. The handwriting on the front was familiar. It was Ashley's. "Why would she write to me?" I muttered, more to myself than to my grandmother. "Only one way to find out," she said. I opened the envelope and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a letter, written in Ashley's neat, precise handwriting. I read it once and then again, unable to believe what I saw. She was apologizing. In the letter, she admitted that she'd been wrong to side with our parents. She wrote about how she'd always been treated as the golden child, and how that had blinded her to how unfairly they treated me. But the real shock came at the end. I didn't know how bad things had gotten until after the trial. "Mom and Dad still blame you for everything, but the truth is, they're falling apart. I overheard them arguing about money, and Dad said something I'll never forget. If Jack hadn't been so stubborn, we wouldn't be in this mess. He was always a mistake." My stomach sank as I read those words. A mistake. That's what he thought of me. Ashley went on to say that hearing our father say that was a wake-up call. She realized how toxic they were, not just to me but to her. She said she was sorry for not standing up for me sooner and that she hoped I could forgive her someday. At the bottom of the letter, she included her phone number and wrote, "If you ever need to talk, I'm here." I didn't know how to feel. Part of me was angry. Angry that it had taken her so long to see what was right in front of her. Angry that she'd stood by while they stole from me and dragged my name through the mud. But another part of me, the part that missed having a sibling, wanted to believe that she was sincere. My grandmother broke the silence. "What does she say?" I handed her the letter, and after reading it, she sighed. "It's up to you, Jack, but people don't change overnight. Be careful." I spent the rest of the evening thinking about it. Was this her way of making amends, or was it just guilt? I didn't know. The next day, I decided to call her. She picked up on the first ring, and the first thing she said was, "Jack, is it really you?" We talked for hours. She told me everything. How our parents were barely holding it together, how they still blamed me for their problems, and how she was starting to see through the pedestal they put her on. She said she was sorry over and over, and for the first time, it felt like she really meant it. But then she dropped another bomb. "Jack, there's something else you need to know," she said, her voice shaking. "Before the trial, Mom and Dad planned to take out a loan in your name. They were going to use it to pay off some of their debts, hoping you wouldn't notice. But when you filed the lawsuit, they backed off because they knew it would look bad in court." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were going to dig me deeper into their mess. If I hadn't stood up for myself, they could have ruined my credit before I even had a chance to build a life. "That's why I'm calling," she continued. "I don't want to play their games anymore. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I can't stay with them, not after everything." I didn't know what to say. This wasn't just an apology. It was a complete unraveling of everything I thought I knew about my family. For the first time in years, I felt like Ashley and I were on the same page. I told her she could call me any time, and though I wasn't ready to fully trust her, I realized something important. I didn't have to deal with this alone anymore. Our family may have been broken beyond repair, but maybe, just maybe, we could start building something new out of the wreckage. A week after my talk with Ashley, my grandmother sat me down. She had this look on her face like she'd been going over something in her head for days. "Jack, I have something to tell you," she said. "I didn't want to bring it up before the trial because I didn't want to overwhelm you, but there's more to what your parents are planning." I immediately felt a knot in my stomach. "What do you mean?" She took a deep breath. "Before the trial, I overheard a conversation. Your parents didn't know I was listening. It was during a family gathering that I didn't go to. Your mother thought I was in the other room, but I heard every word. They were talking about taking out a loan in your name. Your dad said you weren't smart enough to notice, and your mom agreed. It was the only way to solve their problems." I froze. So Ashley was telling the truth. "I didn't know how to tell you at the time," she went on, "but after that, I knew I had to help you fight back. I wasn't going to let them ruin you." Hearing that from my grandmother solidified everything for me. My parents weren't just selfish. They were dangerous. They didn't see me as a person. They saw me as a tool, something to be exploited for their own gain. That's when I made my decision. I was done with them completely. I blocked their numbers, deleted them from my social media, and told my grandmother not to forward any messages from them. For all intents and purposes, they were strangers to me now. But Ashley was different. She was trying to make amends, and while I wasn't ready to fully trust her, I didn't want to shut her out completely. We texted occasionally, nothing too deep, just little updates about her life and mine. She was still living with our parents, but she said she was saving up to move out. I hoped she'd follow through. After 3 months of living with my grandmother, I finally felt ready to take the next step. With her help, I found a small studio apartment across town. It wasn't much, a tiny kitchen, a single window, and secondhand furniture, but it was mine. I was independent for the first time in my life. I got a better job working in a warehouse, and between that and my savings, I was able to make ends meet. My grandmother came by often, bringing home-cooked meals and checking up on me to make sure I was okay. She always said how proud she was of me, and hearing that meant more than she probably realized. I haven't spoken to my parents since the trial, and I don't plan to. Some bridges aren't worth rebuilding, but I've learned to let go of the anger. I don't waste my energy on them anymore. Ashley and I still text from time to time. She's tried to be nice, and although a part of me is still suspicious, I can see that she's trying to change. Maybe one day we'll have a real relationship, but for now I'm taking it slow. Living alone hasn't been easy, but it's been worth it. Every time I pay my rent or cook dinner in my little kitchen, I feel a sense of pride I never had before. My parents tried to take everything away from me, but they failed. I'm free now, and for the first time, I know exactly who I want to be, someone they'll never control again.